Welcome to the Naturally Healthy Pets Podcast. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to Dr. Judy Morgan's Naturally Healthy Pets Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Judy Morgan. My guest today is Julianne Lee, and she is the founder and co-owner of the Adored Beast Apothecary, where she formulates holistic pet care products, and they are amazing. She's also a pioneer in studying the animal microbiome and developing protocols for optimizing gut health, all part of a rapidly expanding picture and understanding of the crucial role the microbiome plays in the health of all of our animals and ourselves. And I feel like we spend so much time now talking about the microbiome, and I don't know if I ever talked about microbiome before I met Julianne. She's also part of a research and development team examining, producing, and formulating unique, first in the industry, species-specific probiotics and functional prebiotics for animals, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Currently, Julie is in her fourth year of an extensive research project on canine cancer at Dalhousie University and is doing research and development within her medical mushroom forest. So one of these days, I'm going to come see the forest in Nova Scotia, Canada, called Mycobiome. Julie lives in Nova Scotia, Canada, very cold, on her rescue farm, Joseph's Field. She shares her home and farm with numerous dogs, cats, horses, donkeys, cows, chickens, one-legged ducks, a blind pot-bellied pig, and a ball python named Bob, all of whom came to Julie as a last resort, chronically ill or abused, and who are now living their best lives at their forever home. You win. You definitely have more crazy things than I do on my farm.
Well, maybe that's they say the apple doesn't fall from the tree. So,
well, I am not going to try to catch up because I am never going to own a ball python. So, one-legged ducks and pot-bellied pigs maybe, but the python, he's off the list. Sorry.
I didn't think I would either, but.
No. Okay.
It's like, you take them? I'm like, oh, okay.
All right. So, working with pre and probiotics for the last 27 years, what was your reason for looking at pre and probiotics from an ancestral and functional perspective?
Well, it's interesting because you said, I really want to come and see that medicinal mushroom forest, right? When I started getting into medicinal mushrooms, I started looking at the concept of them being much more, having much more medicinal value if they have bacteria. So it's part of what I am researching at Dalhousie. So when I really started getting into the forest part, it just brought me way back to my roots of what are we looking at now as far as chronic disease goes? How far have we come with like holistic medicine and probiotics and gut health and all that? Like we've in the last 20 years, it's been exponential, right? So I felt like I needed to really sit, and when you're dealing in the forest and you're looking at mushrooms and we're doing all this research and allowing them to grow naturally, I started really kind of trying to unpack chronic disease and looking at things like, okay, what is still alive, but not necessarily getting the chronic disease that we're seeing in humans and in our companion pets, right? So I started looking at wildlife because you see it all the time in the forest, right? Like you're seeing it constantly, and it's really it's a really amazing place to just sit and contemplate things. So I started looking and thinking about wolves and how wolves are, they're big animals, right? Some of those wolves can be up to 170 pounds. So they're not small breed canine. And they're having babies at 10. And some of them are living in the wild, 15, 16 years old. So when you think about them living in the wild, not having vet care, eating their own food, having to hunt, dealing with the weather, things like that. I just really started thinking about, what are they doing? What are they getting? Well, first thing is that they're getting like sort of their freedom to choose, right? They're not in this space where they're confined or suppressed in their natural inclination of what a canine would do. The next thing they live in groups and packs and families. They aren't getting antibiotics. They're not getting vaccinated. They're not getting flea medication. They're not getting any of that. So I started thinking like their microbiome must be pristine. It really must be amazing. And I also followed the scientist that went to the oldest living group of people and spent a bunch of time there. And this is really why I started looking at the probiotic perspective. Long story short, within a very short period of time, I think he ate 300 different species of proteins and plants and insects and things like that over the course of, I think he said 1 week or 2 weeks, like really like massive amounts of stuff. I know. So he had a fecal transplant with these people, and he continued to check his thing when he got back. I think he was from Detroit, and he ate as much as he could, right? Like he ate as much, diverse vegetables as he could get in the US. And within 3 months, he didn't have it anymore, right? It slowly started to decline. So when we think about that, of what keeps that viable and what keeps that functioning, it's hard. It's hard to keep up with that, right? So I started looking at, because probiotics work differently than transplants, very different. So I started looking at, what would it look like if we started looking at species-specific probiotics, but from wildlife, right? Things that are still eating that diversity in comparison to our companion animals. And so that's why I went that route, is to look at, if I was able to isolate, or if we're able to isolate these particular bacterias and research them and see what they do, is there a possibility that we're going to be getting, a probiotic or a bacteria that stems back, that has been sort of as much as possible untouched by industry and pharmaceuticals and, even high level stress of being urbanized. They have different stress.
Right.
But, so that's the road I took, as far as like looking backwards, like looking behind us to see, okay, what happened? Why are animals, even with this great stuff that we do right now, why are they still getting disease? Why are we looking at like longevity drugs, which is amazing, but why can't we just kind of go back and go, what was happening that was good back there that we can maybe incorporate and use to future, for our future? So that was the
That's amazing. I love the human study. That is so cool. And I think it's true that in the environment that most of us live in, and the environment that our pets live in, is like, I know that in one of his talks recently, Rodney Habib looked at the longest living dogs, and said it was the thing that was similar between all of them, and they all lived outside. Like they lived a very natural, and most of us would be horrified to have our dogs live outside. That's the things that the SPCA comes knocking on your door. Your dog lives outside, and but if we look at the wildlife that is so much healthier. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the drugs and the chemicals and the pollution and everything else that is in our, urbanized lifestyle. But that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
that is
and I think
it's also amazing how fast it goes back to awful.
I know. I know. Yeah. Like to not being able to have, like when you're in the forest and you see things eating things, they're eating our turkey tail. They're eating our, the wood, the logs, they're eating dirt, they're eating bugs because they're even if they're a deer, which is an herbivore, if they're chewing something from the grass, they're not spitting out little bugs, right? They're ingesting the insects. They're getting such a diversity they're consuming such a diversity of different bacterias, different, vegetation, different fibers, different prebiotics, different everything, that I think that to try to replicate that is almost impossible, because it changes with seasons. It changes. Sure. When it rains, there's more mold. When it's dry, there's more, different kinds of dusts and things like that, like more dirt. So it changes. Yeah. It changes daily. So to try to mimic that, sure, by feeding is really difficult. So that's why, and I also have a very strong philosophy that, and the reason that I have is not really from as much of a research perspective as what I've seen by working with thousands of animals at my vet hospital, right? Like empirically seeing emotional changes and things like that, that my hope was with this wolf strain, that resilience and that sort of emotional fingerprint is what we call it in our lab, also transfers, because we know that happens with fecal transplants, right? Like they've done that study with mice where they have two sets of mice that are friendly, and it's terrible. It's awful. It's an awful thing. But then they shock one group of mice, right? And they make those mice more aggressive and fearful. And then they transplanted the fecals, and the mice that were calm became more aggressive and fearful, right? And then vice versa. So we know that DNA and that emotional conceptual perspective transfers through the body, hence the gut-brain axis. So one of my goals was to try and elicit that fingerprint of that sort of resilience and that the calmness that happens within that pack mentality, right? So not because absolutely. Mental and emotional has just as much of an effect as drugs and physical stuff like that. So I think that when Rodney, for sure, because when Rodney looks at that, I what I felt too is that they have freedom, right? So it's not just being outside; they have freedom. They're right. Living
and
more
decision making and. Yeah, absolutely. We need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk more about prebiotics and different things that we can treat with probiotics and really looking at functional medicine. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Thanks to Solutions Pet Products for sponsoring this podcast episode. Solutions is a raw fermented pet food producer that specializes in high organ percentage, complete diets, raw cultured goat milk, gelatin-based supplements, and herbal remedies. Using traditional farming and modern science, they work to provide simple solutions to complex problems. Modern agricultural practices have failed us. Pesticides, GMOs, over-vaccination, monocultural industrial farming, a flagrant abuse of soil and ecosystems. Solutions Pet Products works with small family farms to regenerate the land, and in so doing, revitalizes pets everywhere with clean, healing, ideally formulated, raw fermented pet food. Ask your local pet food retailer about purchasing options, or reach out to Solutions directly at nurture@solutionspetproducts.com. Welcome back. You're listening to Dr. Judy Morgan's Naturally Healthy Pets podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Judy Morgan. My guest today is Julianne Lee from Adored Beast Apothecary. We're talking about her amazing work with pre and probiotics from an ancestral and functional perspective. And this has been amazing. And she does a lot of work with wolves and wildlife and her mycoforest, which mushroom forest. It's just amazing stuff. And in my brain, I'm sitting here going, okay, I don't know how you make this stuff, but I want to cover a couple other things. And then if we have time, we'll go back to that. So I know you do a ton of research on all of your probiotics, and you have a bunch of different strains. And I know that because they're in our warehouse on the shelves. We've got a whole bunch of different ones. And I tend to just kind of rotate through them with my own pets. But I want to talk about functional prebiotics. What's a functional prebiotic?
Okay, we're going to go through this super fast. So at my clinic, when I was starting to do research pre and probiotics, which was like 27 years ago, I thought to myself, okay, I get the probiotic and how animals would get probiotics naturally in the wild, but how are they getting prebiotics naturally in the wild? So I dug in and looked at a natural prebiotics, because most probiotics are in things like FOS, like basically sugars, right? So sugars work really well to keep the bacteria fed in the gut, but they don't have a lot of functional value. And I am someone that if I don't want to put anything in my body or my animals' bodies that doesn't do something other than,
right,
that is functional, that has some value, medicinal value. So I really started looking at prebiotics, and what I found was, like, we first started using larch, right, in our original formulas and stuff. And larch is made from a bark. And the reason that I use that is because it was basically something that everything ate. Because when a wolf or a coyote or a mountain lion or whatever eats the gut of their prey, that's predominantly how they get the majority of their prebiotics. So I started looking at that, and basically everything eats bark, like chipmunks, birds, deer, everything eats bark. So to me, that was more of a species-oriented prebiotic, and it has all kinds of medicinal value. So when I was looking more at ancestral, I thought, okay, well, what I want to start having more prebiotics besides larch if I want to stay with the medicinal functional perspective. So when I was there, I think I mentioned they're all eating our turkey tail, right? Like they nibble on our turkey tail, the squirrels and the chipmunks and the deer, and they all like nibble around it and stuff, especially when they first start growing. So I thought, wow, there's amazing medicinal value in mushrooms, and they have huge amounts of fiber. And so I started doing research on that, and also chlorella, right? Because I wanted to have something that was coming from water, because we don't have that. There's out there in the world, we don't really have that perspective. And it was important to me because at one point the whole world was covered with water, right? And the mineral aspect of it and all of that. So I got into that whole, hypothesis and whatever. So I was like, okay, I want to look at two. My amazing business partner, Dion's like, hey, Julie, you can't look at 3,000 prebiotics. You got to figure out what you want. So I used turkey tail and chlorella. So basically the science behind that was that we, took it to the lab and we worked with it in the lab to see if it maintained the probiotic viability. So was the probiotic healthy when it was ingesting it? Did it have that pro and prebiotic postbiotic effect, which is like the short-chain fatty acids and all of the amazing things that probiotics create together with a prebiotic? And it did. So that's a very short, version of how we did the study. And then we did the feeding studies, and the viability was amazing with the probiotics, using those as prebiotics. So functional prebiotics for me is a prebiotic that not only feeds the probiotic to keep it viable, but gives the body functional benefits, from anything from,
Sure.
Antioxidants to minerals to, cell health to a billion different things. So, yeah.
Sure.
So then
makes perfect sense. So you've got the soil and sea, and then you have the wolf.
Yeah.
So to start your probiotic cultures or whatever it is that you're making in the lab, do you go out and collect wolf feces, or so that's what you're doing? That is amazing.
Yeah. And we found
and then you're able to just keep that going and multiplying and growing.
Yes.
So in your lab or whatever.
We take the feces and we do a test on its entirety, and then we choose we isolate specific strains that are starting to produce results within the lab. So we're always looking for one big thing is immune modulation, because we have so many animals that are on steroids and immune suppressive drugs,
immune suppressants,
right? So that's our key, one of our key things that we look at is, does it have immune suppressive drugs or properties? And then the postbiotic, and then as soon as we isolate the ones that are working the best, then we take those strains and move them into the fermentation perspective so that we can continue to use those specific strains that we've researched.
Cool. Very cool. So are there specific diseases that you think, or issues that these specific, like the soil and sea, the wolf, the roots,
line
strain, the ancestral strains.
Yeah.
Are there diseases that you think these target more specifically than just like your everyday probiotic? Are there specific times when you would say this would be a much better choice?
Yeah. So I'm all about rotation for sure. I think it's like when you said you rotate our probiotics with your animals. I mean, that's perfect, because that is what ideally keeps the body, the intellectual perspective of the gut, which is massive, on its toes. Because then it's like, oh, I have this. Oh, I have that. Oh, I have this. Oh, I have that. It's really, really good. It's almost like I say, using a crossword puzzle for your brain. Rotating probiotics, in my perspective, does that for the intelligence of the immune system of the gut. But the wolf strain, I think, is one of the better ones to use when it comes to, especially when you're dealing with deep chronic disease. So if you've rotated through some stuff and you have some deep chronic disease that for me is sort of like in the lineage of that animal, it's like they need for me, it would be like okay, here's some seeds from something that you're not getting from anything else, right? Like something that is in your ancestry that is been virgin or untouched, or, so real deep-seated chronic disease is something that I love working with. The wolf, I can't tell you why or how, but I have that sense. Like I said, I can't tell you how many reviews we have about how profoundly it affects their mental state. Like anxiety dogs, like separation anxiety, things like that. We have lists of people asking, can this happen? Does this happen? Why is this happening? And I was so excited because I was hoping that was going to happen. And it is happening. So, and then
I have to tell you on that note, I have a 16-year-old English toy who has cancer, mitral valve disease, facial paralysis, CM, syringomyelia. Like, he has so many issues going on, and I have him on the wolf. This morning, he was playing with our 2-year-old like he was a puppy, like racing around. And I haven't had him on the wolf. He was on something else, and I just started reusing it. and he's running around like, I looked at him this morning and said, "What are you doing?" Like, remember, you're an old man. And he was like, "What?"
No, I'm not remembering I'm an old man. I'm a wolf. What's wrong with you?
I know, he was so crazy. So it's interesting that you would say that.
Well, it's true though. I mean, we're getting so many reviews about that. Like I get really excited because, I grew up on a rescue. A lot of our rescues were animals that couldn't be homed because they had major anxiety or aggression or whatever reactivity. And for me to think that we're producing something that is going to help them in that space is just really, really amazing for me. I mean, all the animals that I rescue have anxiety, right? Or PTSD.
Right.
So,
sure.
I mean, I've got my horses on the wolf one because they're all have PTSD.
I was going to ask you that because I haven't been giving probiotics to my rescue donkeys and horses. And I was going to ask which one you use. So that's interesting that I could put them on the wolf.
So
as well.
I put them.
Very cool.
I have them on, obviously, the equine one because it's equine specific probiotics. But then I also rotate with soil and sea and the wolf. Those are the ones my horses get. But and then the soil and sea is amazing for SIBO. It's probably one of the best probiotics because you have to be really careful with probiotics in SIBO. So really careful. Mm-hmm. So and the fact that it has chlorella with it as the prebiotic, we're not eliciting any sugars, which is what you have to be really careful. You're not even really supposed to use real prebiotics when you have SIBO, right? Like FOS and inulin and things like that. Right. So the chlorella works as that, but it really isn't. It doesn't have the negative effects like the sugars do. So for SIBO, we've seen
so cool.
And dogs with pancreatitis, right? Because I think a lot of dogs with pancreatitis have SIBO. A lot are underlying SIBO dogs. Yeah. So it's really great for, and my cats love it because it's got the chlorella in it. So it's really good for cats. My horses like it. So
very cool. So we've got specifics for pancreatitis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, anxiety. This is amazing. I could talk to you about this all day, but we are out of time. Yeah. So people who want more information about Adored Beast can go to www.adoredbeast.com. There is, and you also have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, but you have blogs and information coming out your ears, just amazing information on there. And probiotics are just one product. Well, one group of products made by Adored Beast that are all amazing. There are topicals and things to help treat infections and just all kinds of amazing things coming out of Adored Beast. So Julianne, thank you so much for all the work. And I hate doing research, so I love people like you who do the research and then just tell me what to do. You make my life so much easier.
Well,
thank you very much.
You make everyone else's life. Yeah, it's the working together as teams, right? Even if we're not in the same building.
Exactly. And we so appreciate that. Thank you for everything you do. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another great Naturally Healthy Pets episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for some helpful links. And if you enjoy the show, please be sure to follow and listen for free on your favorite podcast app. We value your feedback and would love to hear from you on how we're doing. Visit drjudymorgan.com for healthy product recommendations, comprehensive courses, upcoming events, and other fantastic resources. Until next time, keep giving your pet the vibrant life they deserve.
The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform. It is no substitute for professional care by a veterinarian, licensed nutritionist, or other qualified professional. You're encouraged to do your own research and should not rely on this information as professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Dr. Judy and her guests express their own views, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Judy Morgan's Naturally Healthy Pets neither endorses or opposes any particular view discussed here.